Hello and welcome back to Empty Cloud Monastery. My name is Bhante Suddhāso, and this morning we'll be looking at discourse of the Buddha. So we'll be starting with paying homage to the Buddha, and then I'll read through the sutta and give some explanations, and then if there's any questions, I'll respond to questions at the end. So we'll start with homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So this morning we're looking at a discourse from the Samyutta Nikaya, chapter 9, sutta number 9. So this is from the first of the 5 major sections of the Samyutta Nikaya, and this first section is characterized by being composed of poetry. So the first book of the Samyutta Nikaya is a series of short discourses which are centered around one or more Dhamma poems. And this particular discourse is a short poem by a bhikkhu in the forest, and then a response given to him by a deva who is overhearing him. So the discourse begins. So, and I'm reading here from Bhante Suddhāso's translation, but I'll make some adjustments as I go along. So the sutta begins. At one time, a certain Vajjian mendicant was staying near Vesali in a certain forest grove. First off, just to explain a bit here, so the word that's being translated as mendicant is bhikkhu, and the word bhikkhu is the word that we most commonly use for identifying Buddhist monks. And the translation of bhikkhu as mendicant is a very literal translation, and this is actually quite important. It's quite important to remember that bhikkhus, the monastic disciples of the Buddha, fundamentally we're beggars. We are homeless mendicants. The Buddhist monastic order originated as a group of dirt poor, wandering, homeless beggars. And so these days, sometimes if one looks at giant rich monasteries with monks being exalted and exonerated, then we can get a different impression of what it means to be a bhikkhu. But fundamentally, becoming a bhikkhu means willingly becoming the most humble members of society, willingly choosing to be an outcast from society, willingly choosing to renounce wealth and power, and willingly choosing to renounce the comforts and pleasures that come with having money and having access to the finer things in society. Again, keeping this in mind, that fundamentally when one is deciding to become a Buddhist monk, one is deliberately deciding to set aside the comforts and privileges of being a member of society in good standing. And one is willingly choosing to put oneself in a position of humility and poverty. And this is because this is what the Buddha was pointing out as being ideal conditions for spiritual growth. So we do so for the sake of spiritual benefit. So setting aside material comfort and pleasure for the sake of spiritual benefit. And this particular bhikkhu was from the Vajjian clan, the Vajjian society, which appears in a number of places in the suttas, and usually they're presented as being a bit shallow, sensualist, materialist kind of people, which gives us a bit of context for what happens in the rest of this discourse. So the sutta continues. It says, now at that time the Vajjis were holding an all-night event in Vesali. So they were having a party in the town close by. And it says, then that mendicant, having heard the sound of musical instruments being played, lamenting, recited this verse. So the monk says, and this part is in poetry. He says, "We dwell alone in the wilderness, like a cast-off log in the forest. On a night like this, who is worse off than me?" So this monk, he's sitting alone in the forest, probably trying to practice meditation, or maybe just trying to sleep at this point if it's late at night. And he overhears this party that's going on in town. So music playing, people enjoying a sensual experience. And he's lamenting most likely the fact that he's not there, that rather than being in town, having a good time, enjoying the party with everyone else, instead, like other good Buddhist monks, instead he's sitting quietly in the forest. So again, deliberately placing ourselves outside of society and outside the reach of the material comforts and pleasures of ordinary life. But rather than delighting in the opportunity to live a quiet, peaceful, spiritual life in the forest, instead he's lamenting the fact that he's not living a wild, sensual life in the town with everybody else. And actually this verse can be familiar, because in reality it's extremely difficult to find monasteries which are completely silent, completely secluded from the noise of the world. So we just recently, a few weeks ago, started a new monastery in Italy. So in the forest, in one of the most remote and quiet parts of Italy, one of the most backward parts of Italy, as some people would put it, which for us is a good thing, by the way. We like backwards. But even there, about once a week, you could hear music reaching the forest. You can hear somebody somewhere is having a good time. But what comes up in the mind when we hear that, it gives an indication of one's own state. So this particular monk is experiencing desire, sensual desire for being part of that sensual experience. He's experiencing a sense of loss, like he's lost something valuable or important. But he's not noticing the value of what he has. So then at this point in the sutta, then a deva, so a deva is a celestial spirit, a being who is in a higher state of rebirth than humans, so beings who are a bit like angels or earth spirits, people who live very happy lives and are a little bit detached from the physical world. So this deva goes to the monk, and the sutta here says, the deva living in that forest had sympathy for that mendicant and wanted what was best for him. So they approached that mendicant, wishing to, it says here, wishing to stir them up, but it means wishing to instill in them a sense of spiritual urgency. So the Pali word here is sangvega. So the word sangvega is quite hard to translate literally, but it has the sense of a sense of spiritual urgency, a sense of the importance of cultivating one's spiritual practice. So it says, so they approached that mendicant wishing to stir up a sense of spiritual urgency and address them in verse. And the deva says, "You dwell alone in the wilderness, like a cast-off log in the forest. Many people are jealous of you, like beings in hell of those going to heaven." And it says, impelled by that deva, the mendicant was struck with a sense of spiritual urgency. That's the end of the discourse. So the deva here is reminding the monk. He's like, well, so the monk is envious of the people in town who are enjoying this party, who are having this sensual experience. But the deva is pointing out to the monk, he's like, actually, there's lots of people who are envious of you. There are lots of people who are envious of people who can live this quiet, peaceful, simple life of the homeless mendicant monk. So it's from the deva is reminding the monk. He's like, actually, you have really good conditions for spiritual practice. Whereas the people in town who are immersed in sensuality, the people in town who are immersed in in superficial and materialistic values. It might be fun while you're doing it, but the effect is to increase one's defilements. So the effect is to make one increasingly animalistic, to draw the mind towards a lower rebirth, to make the mind increasingly enmeshed and entangled in the dangers and drawbacks of the material world. And again, that can lead to being reborn in a lower realm, reborn as an animal, or even reborn in a hell realm. Whereas one who's dedicated to cultivating their spiritual practice, one who's willing to set aside sensuality, who's willing to set aside material pursuits in favor of cultivating one's spiritual qualities. These are like people who are going in the opposite direction. Rather than sinking into a bestial or infernal state of being, instead one is cultivating the conditions for a celestial state of being, a heavenly state of being, divine state of being. One is cultivating the necessary qualities to develop ever higher and more peaceful forms of happiness, to progress towards awakening, to move the mind towards the highest state of happiness possible. So the Deva is saying, there are others who are jealous of you. Like you're jealous of those people in town having a party, but there are people who are jealous of you because you're living this peaceful, serene, humble life, which gives the ideal conditions for cultivating what's truly valuable, what's truly important, which is our spiritual path, our capacity for awakening. And fortunately for this monk, the message got through. So this is something that's really important to keep in mind. So it's actually a relatively common experience when people start getting into spiritual practice, and then you start to find these choices arising in your mind. It's like, well, let's see, this weekend I could go and stay at the monastery and learn some Dhamma and do some meditation, or there's that rave going on in the city. Decisions. What shall I do? And ultimately, we know exactly what we should be doing. We know exactly what is actually for our long-term benefit. But nonetheless, until one attains the third stage of awakening, there's still a certain degree of interest in sensuality, obsession with sensuality. And that can arise in the mind in the sense of loss, like we're missing out on something pleasant. We're missing out on something that could be enjoyable. But instead we should be focusing on the fact that we're taking the valuable opportunity that we have. We're making the most of the valuable opportunity that we have. So we're setting aside something of lesser value, namely sensual pursuits, in favor of something of much higher value, which is the cultivation of our spiritual qualities. My preceptor, Ajahn Pasano, he used to say, it's like trading candy for gold. So we have all these ordinary pleasures in life that we think are so delightful and pleasant, but they're ultimately worthless. What's really valuable is cultivating our practice. So that willingness to set aside the petty, shallow, superficial values of ordinary society and commit ourselves to cultivating a spiritual practice. This is not something to be undervalued, but rather it's something to be highly appreciated. And deliberately seeking out quiet, peaceful conditions for developing our spiritual practice. And when we're in those conditions, to really appreciate it. Learning how to really enjoy silence and solitude. Learning how to really enjoy a simple life, a life where we're not burdened by money, we're not burdened by worldly responsibilities, we're not burdened by superficial desires and superficial values. So that's the end of this discourse. So a short and lovely discourse, as is the case with so much of the Samyutta Nikaya and Anguttara Nikaya. So at this time we can respect the sutta with 3 sadhus, and then I'll see if there's any questions. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And hello to the people checking in online. Hello to Sud, Rebecca, Kit, Karuna, Philip, Mike, Matthias, Brian, Olga, Isabel, and Christina. Good to see all of you. And I see one question here from Sud. So Sud says, seems like envy is the issue here for this Vajjian monk. This is so prevalent, especially in lay life. What are some of the things one can do to guard the mind from envy? Well, again, focusing on your own good qualities, appreciating your own good qualities, looking at the valuable and supportive opportunities that you have in your own life and appreciating that. The truth is that there's always going to be people in the world who have pleasant things that you don't have. There's always going to be people in the world who have opportunities that you don't have. And there's also always going to be people who are worse off than you in various ways. So as long as we look for reasons to be envious, we will find them. And as long as we look for reasons to be arrogant, we will find them. So the better thing actually is not to look for reasons either to be envious or arrogant, but rather just to look at the conditions that we have in our life, look to see what there is here that is positive and supportive, and appreciate it. And look to see what in our life is unsupportive or even counterproductive to our spiritual development, and see what we can do to change it, to improve those conditions. But there's no need to compare ourselves to others. When we compare ourselves to others, it inevitably results either in envy, so a harmful state of mind based upon thinking one is inferior, or it leads to arrogance, a harmful state of mind based upon thinking one is superior. So it's always better not to get into that kind of comparison game, but rather just to look at your own mind, your own conditions, see what's good that you can appreciate, and see what's harmful that needs to be worked upon, that needs to be improved. And that's the only question online. Any questions from the monastery residents here? No? All good? Okay. So we can go ahead and conclude the session at this time. So we'll conclude with 3 more sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And we'll see you next time.